Greetings, parish orphans and retrogrades. Timothy Gordon here with another episode of Rules for Retrogrades. Today I'm joined by Mr. Tyler Rowley, author of the compilation book, Because of Our Fathers. It's all about the crisis of fatherhood, particularly with regard to Catholicism. Tyler, it's a joy to have you with me. Thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Really appreciate it.
What a topic. And I'm addressing the same topic, fatherlessness, practical fatherlessness, not necessarily biological fatherlessness. I'm addressing it in a book that's coming out in January or February with Sophia Press called No Christian Feminism. But I'm addressing it from another angle. You got together 23 authors, right? And got the perspectives on their biographies with regard to fathers. Can you tell me what gave you the idea and what the upshot, what the goal is of your approach, which is a really good approach, commendable?
Right. So the idea, I've told the story a lot because it's a very specific event that happened to give me the exact idea. But some people might be familiar with Father Gerald Murray out of the Archdiocese of New York City. And he was talking on Catholic radio one day. And he was talking all about his father because he had just actually buried his father the week before. So he's talking all about, beautifully about his dad. And he's told one specific story. When he was 7 years old, he noticed that his father was going to mass before he was going to work. A regular Tuesday, 7-year-old kid has no idea that his dad's going to church every single day before he goes to work. So he questions him about it. And he says, he's kind of flabbergasted. He says, "What, Dad, why do you go to church every single day? We only have to go on Sundays." And his dad said, "I love to be with Jesus in the Eucharist every single day." And that, he always remembered that story. So now this is a 60-year-old Father Gerald Murray, and he's telling that story. It's like the one specific story that stuck out in his mind as a kid, that not only does his dad, go to mass every single day, but the reason he gives him, for why he goes, specifically the Eucharist, and that means that you're with Christ. And it just kind of, this bomb goes off in the 7-year-old kid's head. And, he probably didn't start going to daily mass himself as a 7-year-old, but probably thought about it. And it made him realize that, the biggest and the strongest and the best guy in his life, because that's what dads are to their 7-year-old kids. They're the strongest and the best guy in the world. They don't know anybody better. And his dad, his best guy, is going to mass every single day. He's getting down on his knees. And this is so, church, is all of a sudden isn't some Sunday family event that you go to, to hear a talk. It's something else. And this is probably where the idea of worship, comes into his life for the first time.
So let me ask you this. Sure. How does it work out then with 23 authors? It's a compilation book.
Right.
In the cases when Father Gerald Murray, who's one of the authors, right?
Yeah, he's one of the contributors.
That's ideal, right? That is optimal. How do the authors who had a suboptimal fatherhood situation growing up, how do they manage to spin this story? Or is it all 23 completely optimal Catholic fathers? Tell me how the diversity of opinion works, the diversity of shared experience, or maybe not shared experience.
Gotcha. So I hear that story, and then the first thing that I'm thinking in my mind is a study that my priest sent me a long time ago. And I talk about this study in the book, and it talks about how it's just about the generational transmission of faith. Okay, how does the faith get passed down to children? And it takes a look at fathers and mothers and sons and daughters. And the correlation is just stunning on how much more influential the father is to the faith life of the child. Yeah. So I have these two things kind of bouncing around in my head. And then I'm going through like the mental Rolodex in my head of all the people I know, family members, friends. And I'm just sort of blown away as I'm driving. I'm thinking to myself, every single person I know is like a spiritual mirror of their father. Like, oh yeah, my friend, Tim, he's fallen away. His dad fell away. My friend Mike, he's serious about his Catholic faith. His dad's serious about his Catholic. I mean, one after the other, dozens. So to get to your question, I just the first thing I did was I picked up the phone and I talked to Father Murray. And I said, "Hey, if I put a book together like this, would you contribute what you said on the air?" And he said, "Of course I would." And then I And then besides Father Murray, the other 22 people, I didn't know anything about their fathers. I just started calling people who I knew as serious and committed Catholics. And I wanted to see if this rang true. And I would say 90 to 95% of the people who I thought of that responded to me, the response was A, yes, my father was a serious and committed Catholic.
Right.
I want to contribute an essay. And B, because their father was so influential in their life, there was just this gratitude that sort of poured out of all of them, and they were excited about doing this. And certainly, there were a few people who said, actually, my dad, wasn't too influential. I'm a convert to the faith. I found the faith later in life. But like I said, 90 to 95% of these people that I talked to, so all 23 people who contribute the essays about their fathers, they have a relevant story in the sense that, at least from their perspective, their fathers were committed and serious Catholics.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Are there any Catholics of the 23 contributors? Because I haven't seen all 23 stories in Fine. Are there any of the 23 that are non-converts that are cradle Catholics or probably reverts? They tend to be the same thing if they're near our age, cradle Catholics and reverts, whose fathers were not active in the faith life, but maybe semi-active. Were there any stories of the 23 cradle Catholics?
So you may be familiar with the Institute of Catholic Culture down in Virginia. That's Father Hezekiah runs that. And his story in particular, I find pretty interesting. His father had 3 children. All 3 of them were unbaptized until, for the greater part of their childhood. He gets divorced from his wife, Father Hezekiah's mother. They're divorced pretty early on.
Yeah.
He is obsessed with money, with worldly success. And then after the divorce, the mother passes away. And this is one of the things that has this sort of that changes his heart in some sort of way, where he turns back to the Catholic faith, has his children baptized, and then out of that family, and then he becomes the sort of guy that drives around literally with a sign on the back of his station wagon that says "Free Bibles, just ask." Committed to evangelizing every single person that he could. But he has a conversion later in his life, and then he has 2 sons who end up becoming priests. So that particular father is someone who had a conversion later in life. Bishop Strickland's father, Bishop Strickland writes an essay from Tyler, Texas. His father was a convert, a Baptist convert to the faith, and has a really cool story. And Bishop Strickland's story is sort of all of these stories are very real. They're sort of approachable men. Bishop Strickland talks about how him and his father had a pretty bad relationship growing up. There was a lot of headbutting. There was a lot of sort of not understanding one another. But at some point later in Bishop Strickland's early, young adult life, he sort of looks back on his father and realizes that, most of the confrontation and the tension that he had with his father was really due to his father really sacrificing himself constantly for the family, whether it's his time or whether it's, punishing the children for certain reasons, but it was really coming from a good place. And then, this is a man who ends up becoming a bishop in the Catholic Church. And he'll say, even though there was that tension and animosity with his father, reflecting back, it's his father who really gives him that sacrificial nature, keeps him committed to God and to Christ, and is the reason he ends up becoming a priest.
Yeah, so that's really interesting from the perspective that you have the diversity of experiences which led to serious inculcation of the faith, let's say. Is there room for, and by the way, Ignatius is the publisher, and I also wanted to say, I think that's the Pew Research study that you were referencing earlier, shows the stark contrast between fathers taking their family to Mass if the mother stays behind, and mothers taking their families to Mass when the father stays behind. The difference couldn't be any more stark. Right. Mothers aren't the leaders. They don't So if your mom takes you to mass, that's good. She's doing the best she can. But if you don't see your dad do it, 90% of the time you end up falling away. I think that's Pew Research. But I'm curious about the dialogic value of, because it's a really interesting idea. 23 perspectives mixed together. There are takeaway principles, but they're not takeaway principles in the same sense as a chapter with 23 books, which all work in concert. What are the takeaway principles about fatherhood in the age of feminism, inculcated feminism? Now it's not even the 60s and 70s anymore where people talk about feminism. It's just all of its precepts have been absorbed into society, and that is destroying Christianity. And it's destroying Christianity at the onus, at the fault of fathers like Adam, right? They're the ones that gave up this position. This makes the book very timely. It also makes me curious as to how the 23 positions play together.
So what are the themes that are running through these 23 people?
Yeah, and what does a reader take away from, let's say, the main 3 or 4 themes? Like, oh man, this guy was on to something. I don't know about this. I do think this was insightful, etc.
Yeah, I would say, so the first thing I would say, trying to get something up here on my screen, one sec. I think one of the first thing that jumps out is there's a lot of stay-at-home moms, and there are a lot of husbands who love those wives. And that is, I would say, the one of the most common themes that you're going to see, that the father is sacrificing himself on a daily basis, whether it's with his time, his job, his relationship with the kids. He's sacrificing himself. The mother is home with their children, and the father has this, at least from the child's perspective, they remember that their father respected their mother and loved her, and especially, in a lot of cases, never let the children usurp the mother's authority, right? So that's like a big thing in what we talk about with fatherlessness today. It's not just that children are more inclined to follow the lead of the father, because they are, but it's also even such more simple and practical than that. A mother simply cannot control her especially her sons. She will not, over time, by the time those children are 7, 8, 9, certainly into their teenage years, have the ability to control them. Right. And these fathers don't let their children take advantage of their mother, from in any sort of cultural way inside the household. So that was definitely a theme among these 23 fathers.
Fascinating. That's
and
good.
And then another interesting theme, if in all 23 essays, I should probably count this number because I found it really fascinating. I would say of the 23 essays, 20 of them mention Mary in some sort of specific way, whether it was the child remembering a family rosary that was prayed, whether it was the father having a devotion to Mary in some sort of way. But Mary seems to always play some sort of integral role in how the child remembered their father. Father Rocky talks about how a particular story that was told in his family was when his father was in World War II, and he's in this battle where almost all of his men die. He was a sergeant in the military in World War II. He's in this battle. I mean, it looks like he's going to die. Yeah. And he always told people that there was a moment where there was nothing else he could do except cling to his rosary and literally grab it in his pocket and just pray for a better outcome. And Father Rocky, as a child, hears that, and then as an adult, he's reflecting on that and saying, there was just something about my dad who was so big and so muscular and so brave, being willing to admit that he turns to this woman. And then it kind of illumines who Mary is to people. It's not just some sort of idea that we have. She is a strong mother that you can turn to. That is the way to Christ. So it's very fascinating, I thought, how many people mention Mary in their essays. And then there's definitely just a lived virtue, teaching your children right from wrong. leads them to truth in general, right? So these children grow up with being told that certain things are right and certain things are wrong. And then many of them talk about how that has a psychological effect to one day when they get a little bit older saying, okay, well, if there's right and wrong, then I want to know what the ultimate truth is, but if you grow up without thinking, if everything's just sort of subjective and morally relativistic, you're never going to have this moment where you're saying to yourself, okay, now I want the deepest truths in life. So the fathers teaching right from wrong, being men of virtue, is definitely a theme as well. And then living Sundays. You'll notice that the Sabbath plays a big part in these families. Most of the kids mention that Sunday meant something in their family. So their family was different from all the other families. And this day was different from all the other days. And that is instilling in them their Catholic identity. So those are just some things that you'll take away. There are a lot of practical things like that you'll notice. I mean, they're beautiful portraits of their fathers. Some of it is just about their father, but then they get into like very specific stories about them, and then through those specific stories, there's very practical takeaways.
Yeah, that's what I was really driving at. It's difficult with compilations, but beautiful when done well to abstract takeaway principles from multiple different perspectives. It sounds like you got it there, because when you do a lot of interviews the way I do with a lot of different folks in the Catholic world and actually outside, you're really hoping when you pitch a soft pitch like that, like, yeah, what are some of the takeaways, that it's not super unsubtle, the response from your interlocutor, something like, oh, they just really loved their mothers a lot and their fathers were really strong. It's really good to hear you say, particularly takeaway point number one, that there's a distinction within a distinction within a distinction in the dynamic that most traditionalists like us know, that the mom should be staying at home, the dad should be sacrificing himself by working, the dad runs the show. It's not just that the mom shouldn't, it's that she really can't. But what you don't hear so often is that the father enforces an anointed, set-aside place of honor for the mother with her kids, because that's needed. She's not another kid, obviously. That's ridiculous.
Right.
She needs that set aside as the kind of first mate of the ship by the captain. Right. That's a kind of good takeaway point. And if you saw that in multiple stories, if it was abstracted from multiple perspectives, then I'm impressed. The book, again, is an Ignatius Press book because of our fathers. And it sounds, I looked at the list of authors, I think a couple months back, and I said, wow, this is a really great mix. It is especially timely given what's going on in our country. We had a serious candidate for president who was a woman in 2016, now a woman who's a vice president. This speaks to the set-aside point we just made, right? I mean, talk about the timeliness in general of this book. Women should be called back to the home. Men should be called daily back to the home as often as they can get there from their jobs.
Yeah, the timeliness of it, I would say, I think a lot of people are talking about that because of, what's going on in the world right now. I would love, if someone can pull this off, I'd love to see a study of all the kids, throwing rocks at police and setting fires in the street and burning down shopping malls. I would love to see a study that kind of extracted the family life of these kids. I think you're probably going to break down into two categories. These children or young adults had no father in the home at all, barely know him. And then the other sort of Antifa, white liberal guy who's running around doing this stuff probably grew up maybe in a 2-parent household, maybe even wealthy, but the father had no concept of the spiritual life, gave them no concept of God, and they're just sort of frustrated with the world in general, because that's kind of what settles in when you have when you're not given the ultimate purpose in life for why you exist and why you're here. And I think
so sorry to cut you off just real quick. You have another point, but have you seen the statistics on school shooters with regard to the metric you're talking about?
I have. It's almost always fatherlessness.
I've never seen one of these with a father, and they're usually these kind of white dweebs who are probably future Black Lives Matter or Antifa.
Right.
So they fit that demographic you're talking about. I would be very surprised if any of these arsonists and murderers in the street, the Black Lives Matter dweebs, if there were any of them who knew their father. I would think it would be just like school shooters. But sorry, you're making another point there.
Yeah, I would just say, so what, whether the father is completely absent, or whether the father is sort of there but provides no sort of spiritual guidance for the child. I just think, the questions fester within human beings like this. I mean, how could they not?
Right.
Where did I come from? Who am I supposed to be like? My dad's not around. I'm not supposed to be like my mom. So who am I supposed to be like?
Right.
Who made me? Who loves me except for mom? These are questions that will burn a child's heart to the point where, and here's a really good connection to make right now between the point you made and the one that I'm making. You mentioned school shooters. The first essay in the book is a guy named John Castillo. John Castillo is the father of a boy named Kendrick Castillo. You would have heard a lot about a school shooting in May 2019 in Colorado if it wasn't for Kendrick Castillo, who was a young Catholic kid at a charter school, and he got up and he rushed the shooter at the front of the school, pinned him up against a whiteboard, was shot in the heart, and he's the only one who died. His two other boys were able to subdue the shooter. Now, Kendrick, John is Kendrick's father. He writes the essay. He talks about his father, who gave him the Catholic faith very directly every day. John lived his life to do the same, tried to give Kendrick the Catholic faith every single day, and plus things like camping trips and hunting and all these sorts of things that men and fathers do with their children. And then there was two school shooters, actually. One of them entered Kendrick's room. The other one entered another classroom. These two kids get up in the middle of class. They go home. They do drugs, and then they get their guns, and they set one of the mother's car on fire. They write 666 on the garage. They light the car on fire, and then they go to school. One of these kids has basically no father. He was running drugs from Mexico to the States, was in prison for beating his mother when he wasn't running drugs. 11 days before the shooting, he posted on Twitter that he missed his father. The other child was adopted, so abandoned by his biological father. And then even his adopted parents, he didn't have a good relationship with at all. So you have these like demonically led kids, no fathers, hell-bent on sharing their pain with the rest of the world. And then you have clashing with the life of Kendrick Castillo, who was given the Catholic faith every single day by his unbelievable father. And Kendrick acts like Jesus and gives his life, while these other two kids are trying to share their pain with the whole world. And if those two kids had dads, good dad, even average dads, they wouldn't have wanted to shoot all their classmates in the head that day. And kids wouldn't want to be throwing bricks at police, because they would understand discipline, they would understand some truth, they would be able to be controlled as well.
Yeah.
And this is really what's at stake. I mean, this is a national crisis. I would absolutely love to see President Trump at his next State of the Union to address this in a way that we can quantify it through statistics. Like, we talk about healthcare statistics and economic statistics. We talk, everything. We have all these metrics to see how we're improving with things. There should be a father statistic. Like, how many kids this year are born out of wedlock? How many kids are being raised without fathers in the home? This is what's going to actually make the biggest difference with the economy, with healthcare, with all these other things. And we have to start taking this extremely seriously. We have a national emergency on our hands. I mean, 70% of the kids, Black kids growing up, have no dads in the home, no fathers at all. So of course they're doing these crazy things, and they're going to prison at alarming rates. It's because the dads are not there.
If one wants to quantify these things in a meaningful way, or a way that matters to secular humanists, dig this. 8 times more likely poverty is if a person starts a household without having a house. In other words, if you're not married and you start having children out of wedlock, you're 8 times more likely to end up impoverished. And then all the other statistics you mentioned force the discussion. They or ought to be forcing the discussion, even on the people that have, the secular kind of halfway conservatives and the left, who would never want to discuss the vital role of fathers in society. The father is the priest of the ecclesiola, the household, the church in miniature, whatever you want to call it. I know those parties that I just mentioned, the secular left and secular conservatives, never want to talk about the C word, church, or church in miniature, but they do care about crime, poverty, education, all these corny, boring topics that yes, they matter, but we're sick of hearing about them because it's the kind of secularist du jour topic, just transfers from one of those three to the next, and we're sick about hearing about it.
Right.
So, I mean, this is a really important thing to mention. How do we make the conversation popular? The statistics alone aren't doing it. It's not a res ipsa loquitur situation.
Yeah, well, like I said, I would love to see our politicians start to have these sorts of metrics. I would love to see more people in these communities, which you are seeing, especially in the Black community. I love how many leaders are coming out of there and saying, all right, enough's enough. Like, I'm just getting on the side of truth here, and I don't care about the popularism of what the culture is saying right now. Like, this has nothing to do with a bunch of racist white cops. This has everything to do with an out of control community of male kids who are just have no discipline whatsoever. So there are a lot of leaders that are stepping up. We definitely need more of those, and just people in the church need to do this. Like, I can't, I hated to see like so many Catholic churches put out statements about after the George Floyd killing, about how we have to be racially sensitive and we have to combat systemic racism. It's like, why are we as a church, any parish, bending our knee to this narrative that is so fake? And of course, no one wants an innocent person to die. We don't have to. We're the people who stand outside abortion clinics when they're ripping children apart. We don't have to prove that we're against killing innocent people. Amen. But we also don't have to be the ones who are cowering and looking like such cowards and just kind of going along with the narrative, like Major League Baseball and the NBA and every single Doritos and every single corporation out there that is pandering. I wish our church would just not pander like that and always just stick to the truth. And then I think we just have to, one thing is pointing out to people, all of this stuff, everything from divorce to abortion to contraception to the homosexual agenda to surrogacy. This is something that's not talked about a lot. Surrogacy, like insanity. All of these things are designed to make people see the family less, right? So in the beginning of my book, I talk about how it's pretty interesting how as soon as the incarnation happens, sort of the first thing that happens is to make sure Saint Joseph, is the earthly father of Christ. And I had that sort of my only spiritual insight, I would say, into the book. This is really interesting, and that fathers would do themselves well to sort of reflect on that. Sort of, if this family, Mary and Jesus, if they need a father, I mean, how much more do you and I need our fathers? And that unit, that Mary and Saint Joseph and our Lord, that is such a beautiful divine image. And no matter where you go as a father, and you'll know this, when you and your wife take your children somewhere, you are like a walking icon of the love of God. And people look at you and they marvel at that. And then the same amount of people who marvel at it, there's also people who hate it because of how beautiful it is. And all of this stuff is designed to make people see less of that. They don't want people to see families, moms and dads with their children in lifetime relationships with their kids. They hate it. The enemy hates the family. Black Lives Matter hates the family. They want to reimagine the family. It's in their mission statement. I know you've pointed this out. They don't want the family to look like this anymore. This is all part of this, so-called LGBTQ agenda. And we need to tell people that. We need to point it out that all of this stuff. We've gotten to the point where we literally live in a world where a woman can have no relationship with a man. She doesn't even have to know a man, and she can have a household of kids through something as insane as surrogacy. In Rhode Island, they recently passed the new Parentage Act. This was like to update all the parenting laws based on all the crazy stuff that's happening. Who we consider parents and all the homosexual marriage type stuff. And the whole bill doesn't mention the word father once. It's basically a document designed to show people that the father is no longer even necessary for a family, and his rights have been pushed out a little bit more. We should do a whole show on the Parentage Act, how crazy it is. But this is all part of reimagining the family. It's always driven by the secular left. And as conservatives, as Catholics, we need to, anytime a law is proposed, anytime there's any sort of legislation, the first question we should ask ourselves, does it help or hurt the family, the true family? Is it going to help? Is it going to create more mom, dad, children in a lifelong relationship units, or is it going to create less of them? And that should be the benchmark for a party's complete platform, is the family. We just got to keep talking about it, I guess. And read
couple
my book.
things. Read Because of Our Fathers, Ignatius Press. I have a question or two in closing to ask you, but I want to flush out a few of the things you're saying there that make a lot of sense and deserve further explication. First off, Sister Lucia of Fatima sent to Cardinal Carlo Caffarra in 1991 an important, interesting letter. If you recognize Cardinal Carlo Caffarra, he's one of the two deceased Dubia cardinals, along with Cardinal Joachim Meisner, the two deceased heroes. The two surviving Dubia cardinals are, of course, Cardinals Burke and Brammuller. But Cardinal Caffarra shared with LifeSite in 2017 something that I don't think he'd ever published before, that Sister Lucy of Fatima had in 1991 when he was starting an institute for the family in Rome. A fascinating letter where she gives an eschatological insight, viz. That the final attack by the evil one, Satan, would be on the family. The reason this is so staggering is because, we're not evangelical Protestants. We're not Jehovah's Witnesses. We're Roman Catholic, and we know better than anyone, and we try to cross ourselves and remember it, that no man knows the hour of the Parousia, the second coming, the end of the world, what have you. So this is an interesting tipping of the hand by heaven, via Mary, through Cardinal Carlo Caffarra, that if we have eyes to read the times, maybe we got the first big clue in recent church history that we're not super far from the end. Now, you got to be careful. That my point was just to recall the mind, refresh the recollection, that what you're saying is not only important, it's current event relevant. And the attack that we see on the family, undeniable attack on the family, which has undeniably ticked up incrementally, quantifiably, whatever, it means something, doesn't it? It means something distinct. Homosexuality, I remember in the 90s and the early 2000s, before the homosexual lobby in Hollywood was in full attack mode, you would just get the maybe one character per sitcom that's gay. Now we see what they're doing when they have power. It's not a civil rights movement. It's not an equality movement. It is an attack by the evil one on the family. And like you say, no one talks about surrogacy. How many times in Catholic school did I hear people, half-witted Catholics talking about surrogacy like it's a Catholic thing?
Right.
The main thing, though, even with these grabbier headlines, surrogacy, homosexuality, homosexual adoption, they make you roll your eyes. Still, the most ubiquitous problem confronting society with all those sexier problems is still just Divorce, Catholics divorce at roughly the same rate as everyone else. Even in the 1 out of 2 households that don't divorce, fathers are spiritually absent 90% of the time. So the book is especially timely, and I just think society, through Black Lives Matter, less so with that Antifa, in its secular iteration, the secular church always socializes sins. And it does so in a Marxist way that will fundamentally change society, but it always takes private sin. Sin is always private. There's a moral agent behind all of the real ills. I guess there would be behind all the imagined ills as well, right? There's no systemic racism, but they're always seeking to publicize, to socialize sin so they can make some sweeping change in Western society, which is what they want to do.
Right.
I say, you say, it's really about the single cell of society, the household, and the captain of the household, the priest of the household, fathers. That's why I wanted to interview you. This book is 100% timely, and if you can get across to President Trump, get back into the White House for 4 more years, and please talk about fatherlessness, practical fatherlessness, and actual fatherlessness. Fathers need to be the heads of the household. What else is there to say? I mean, did you have a favorite, Tyler, a favorite perspective in this book? I don't know if you want to tip your hand too much that way, but which one sticks out to you?
That's all right. I'll answer that. So based on what you were saying, I want to, the first thing that I write in my book is from Saint Charbel. It says, the family is the basis in the Lord's plan, and all the forces of evil aim to demolish it. Uphold your families and guard them against the grudges of the evil one by the presence of God. That's the first thing I say in the book, because that's the message. That's why this book was written. And another practical thing I want to say is just the main message of the book. One of the most practical things I want fathers to take away, because I want to reach these fathers who still call themselves Catholic, but don't do anything to actually live a Catholic life. But there's something there where they know they shouldn't let go of it. And just letting them know that it is them that is going to be responsible for their family losing the faith. I think that's huge, because I think a lot of these guys think they can kind of float through life and they can kind of take Sundays off. And if mom's kind of giving them the CCD classes, then everything's going to be fine. And I think they just need to know, statistically, you're wrong. Biologically, right. That's crazy. The church has never taught that. And I asked them in the book, have a conversation with your ancestors. You are Catholic because hundreds and hundreds of years of Catholic men have come before you and have given you this faith. So what if your great, great, great grandfather came up to you and he tapped you on the shoulder and he said, hey, is your family still Catholic? Why did you let that faith fade from your family's life? And what did you replace it with? And do you even know what the church teaches? How could you let it go without even knowing what it teaches, without even being able to explain what Catholicism is? So that's really what I want these men to kind of grasp, is that, hey, wake up. It's up to you. Time to man up. And it's not your wife's not going to lead your children to heaven like you can. So if they lose their eternal salvation, if your great 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 grandchildren never know Jesus Christ or never baptized, it's going to be because of you. I should say just your grandchildren are going to be baptized because of you.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And then I'm not going to dodge that question though. I'm looking at the list. I'll say this. I'll say the first line in Jesse Romero's essay is, my father beat up a rapist after Mass. So that's kind of hard to beat when you start off.
Yeah. Jesse doesn't mince words, man.
Oh, so he says, my father beat up a racist after Mass. So I thought his is really good. And then
rapist or racist, or a racist rapist?
He was probably a racist rapist, but he was literally raping a woman in a car, and they had just come from Mass and they ate food at a Mexican restaurant, and they come out and there's this rape going on. He's actually ends up becoming a serial rapist. Everyone else kind of like, I don't really know what's going on there. I'm going to kind of walk by. Jesse Romero's dad takes off his tie, hands it to Jesse, runs over, and there's a big guy in the backseat of a car on a woman, jumps on him, rips him out of the car, and they have this tussle in the street. And then the cops come and arrest this guy who ends up becoming a serial rapist. So that's pretty interesting. And then I like Chris Check. Chris Check's dad was very cultural, and his whole Chris Check's essay can be boiled down to three things: good books, good food, and good wine. That's how his dad catechized him through giving him books to read, and then cooking really good meals with the family and having that fellowship as a family, and then
the cosmopolitan approach to familial evangelization. I like that one. That's stylish, man.
Yeah, yes, I like that essay too. But honestly, and I'm saying this as unbiased as I can. I cried after reading some of these. You laugh, but after every one, you kind of have there's a little bit of a motivating factor there that, okay, these are dads that did it the right way, and if they can do it, I can do it. And really, I'd like to get, a woman today told me, I'm going to buy this book for all the people that I know that are getting married. All these guys, they're going to get married in the church, of course, but that they have no intention of raising the kids Catholic. So this is a really good book for people like that to get in the hands of those Catholic men who, there's something there. They'll say they're Catholic. They can probably, tell you, who their confirmation saint was, but they're not going to confession. They're not going to mass, and so hopefully we can reach them.
One thing I like about you, I already mentioned this. I like non-token answers. The worst is political answers where like, they're all equal, or all of them are so good that I probably have one, but they don't stand out. I like that. My father beat up a rapist after mass is what drew you to Jesse's. That's what draws people to Jesse in general.
Right.
One of them, myself and actually my wife had semi-famously on Twitter a little dust up with Abby Johnson, who's one of the contributors, who does good work that people know about, over the role of feminism. Can there be a Christian feminism? Obviously, me and my brother wrote the book against this notion. Hopefully there's some evolution there in Abby's perspective, but I'm curious, what was her story with her father like? Because feminism is the vile toxin that drives all this. It doesn't just mean females. I mean, Adam surrogating to Eve, his role, and right, standing down. If your feminist kind of main premise is you want to always blame men, well, there's something to blame men for even in feminism, but it is feminism that's evil, and it is feminism that drives all this, that suggests, actually it's serpentine, the woman doing the man's job. That requires the man standing down and being a beta. So I'm curious what her perspective was on her father.
Right. So I'll say Abby's essay is the only one of all 23 where she didn't have a Catholic father. And I admittedly was hesitant about that. I didn't ask anybody without a Catholic father. And then I decided to include her because she obviously converted to the Catholic Church. And I figured there was something there in her father's upbringing that was integral to her eventually finding the Catholic faith. Her essay kind of revolves around her. She was baptized with her father as a I think in a Baptist or a Methodist, I can't remember. She was baptized with her father at 11 years old, and then when she left Planned Parenthood, her whole essay kind of circles around like her father's response to that. And her father was always praying that she would leave, and never, beat her over the head or just kind of was gentle with her, never affirmed what she was doing, and always prayed and always trusted God that she was going to leave. And then when she finally leaves, she calls him, tells him that she left, and she always remembered that the first things he said was, do you need a ride, and do you need money? So like, just kind of her father, asking her, almost like treating her like she was still like that 12-year-old girl, just looking out for her needs, and, not condemning her, and being trusting of the Lord, and then saying, okay, do you need anything? We're ecstatic you left, and now what do you need, so that I can take care of you, because I'm your father, and I'll always take care of you. So that's kind of what, and I did have someone, Brother Andre from, what is it, the Immaculate Slaves of Mary. I don't know if you know Brother Andre.
A little bit, yeah.
He's a friend of mine. He interviewed me. He said that he didn't like that I included a non-Catholic father because it kind of showed that there wasn't a connection to truth, and the person being brought up and raised Catholic. And I see that point. It was a risk that I took, and I was open with Abby about that as well. Ultimately decided to do it, and thank God, she's going to the Latin Mass, and she's
I know.
dedicated to the Catholic life and does amazing work. So
yeah,
her rest is good.
So yeah, I'm thinking about the words of Brother Andre. Existentially speaking, the connection to truth that a Protestant bears, her Protestant father, is there, but it's severely distorted. It plays out in a way like, I mean, I saw the Unplanned movie. I'm sure he's a nice man, but a Catholic father over against the kind of secular Christian version of Protestant father. Many of my friends who are Protestant have great relationships with their dads and whatever. They seem like very, very nice people, the ones that take Scripture seriously. But the approach differs starkly. I mean, can we say a Catholic father? You'd be like, look, this is an active life or death situation, spiritually speaking. To not, you can use the pejorative language and say, oh, well, I didn't want to beat her over the head with it. You could also use, I'd say, more accurate language and say, well, this is more important than anything. Who cares if you have a job? Who cares if your health is even well, right? Making the right spiritual decision is a Catholic thing. That's probably because of our Catholic connections to virtue ethics through Aristotle and St. Thomas. So I think it's good you included that perspective, because Catholics will be able to see, oh, there is this sui generis, one non-Catholic father, probably a very nice man. He seemed like it in the movie, but their ideas have consequences, as a famous historian of thought once said. And the ideas of Protestantism have consequences. This doesn't mean that all Catholic dads are good. What a joke that you and I have spent a show's worth of time bemoaning that most Catholic dads are really, really crappy and have stood down. And in many ways, maybe her father surpassed them. But in this category, it does seem relevant that the Protestant, slightly more enlightenmentized secular version of how ought I to regard my adult daughter who's made the most dangerous decision actually plays out in a public way that we can talk about without prying.
I wonder, we talk about, I think you talked about this in your first book, The Catholic Republic.
Yep.
Protestantism kind of gives rise to liberalism in general, right? So this moral relativism. So I wonder, I'd be curious to ask Abby if that sort of Protestant upbringing sort of lend itself to a morally relativistic attitude towards life, which she ends up being a director of the worst place on earth. So I wonder if there is a connection, because we know that Protestantism is sort of the grandfather of you determine what is true. Whatever, you open the Bible and you figure it out. And we know where that leads. So I'd be actually interested to know her answer to that, what she thinks about that.
Hey, great conversation. The worst is when you just run through these spun out questions on the book. Sounds amazing. This is what ought to follow upon an enlivening book with 23 perspectives from 23 interesting Catholics. Great job, man. I mean, everyone should pick up this book. I'm going to picture it on the screen here. And Ignatius publishing another great book. Tyler Rowley is the author. Because of Our Fathers is the title of the book. Do you have any parting shots of wisdom for us, Tyler?
No. God bless you and your work, what you do. Keep going, keep fighting. We gotta band together and we gotta fight the culture. There's a lot at stake. And I don't know, I always think to myself, why did God put us in charge of cleaning this place up and bringing people to him? But he did. That's the truth. We have to do it. That's the way God created the world. We are called to go out and evangelize and bring people to him. So we got to do it, and we can't be. Let me close with this. Actually, did you read Father Paul Mankowski's letter recently? I guess I didn't know anything about Father Paul Mankowski. I guess this is the Jesuit that recently passed away that people have been talking about.
Okay.
And I guess he's just this amazing. He's in the center of all this, trying to reform his order for the last 2 decades. And he wrote something about the priesthood. It's called "What Went Wrong." And he really, you want to talk about someone who doesn't mince words and doesn't just give you generalities. He talks about like the specific ways that the sex abuse scandal was able to spread and how all of this craziness within the church was able to spread. And he goes through, he gives you answers. And he ends his essay this way. He says, "I believe that reform will come, though in a future generation, and that the reformers whom God raises up will spill their blood in imitation of Christ. In short, I find absolutely no grounds for optimism, and I have every reason for hope." And I would just say, he's talking about
beautiful
reforming the priesthood, but I think we have, in the same way, in reforming Catholic fatherhood, there's going to be many Catholic fathers are going to need to culturally martyr themselves and spill our blood, either literally or culturally, and have, through that, the light of Christ will come out. We have to just show the distinction. There's so much darkness pushing into this world. Show the distinction. You're not going to be part of that. You're not going to become even a little bit part of the darkness. Push up against it, martyr yourself, and the world will see the stark difference between Christ and this world. And I think that's how we're going to change the culture.
Anytime martyrdom comes up, guys like you and me that are actually, athletes that are willing to put our bodies on the line, even guys like us are like, well, there's red martyrdom, but maybe I'll just be a white martyr. It's always more pleasant to be like, let's have cultural figurative martyrdom. Red martyrdom might await guys like us, and it's if you don't laugh, you cry. But that's a beautiful. There are a couple beautiful lines in what you just read. In closing, I want to make you a semi-formal proposal. After Trump retakes the White House on November the 3rd, starting on November the 4th, I was deeply impressed by your words at the beginning of our interview that we need to make a serious Catholic imprint on the United States by making a serious Catholic petition to President Trump to get these quantifiable statistics and figures out there and get it into the legislative lobby. Create a real lobby for fatherhood. I like that, and I would.
Let's work on that. Let's do it.
Let's work on it together. I will help any way I can. It goes right in line, dovetails beautifully with one of my big projects here at Rules for Retrogrades, and my brother Dave's as well. So I'm not just saying this hollowly. We're both busy dudes, but let's get on that sometime after November 4th when Trump retakes the White House.
Amen. God willing.
Deus Volt. God bless you, man. Thanks a million. The book, again, is Because of Our Fathers, an Ignatius Press book, and the author is Tyler Rowley, who spent about 45 minutes with me here today answering good, deep, profound, explicative questions that give you a sense of the 23 sub-authors of this text who contributed essays. Good stuff, man. And I'll talk to you after November 4th.
Absolutely. God bless you.